So I literally stopped by light and this shop owner thought we were CID and says, yeah, close the shop, close the shop.
My uncle says, had we shouted, right, close your shop there, they would have all just shut the shutters and took off there. When I get back, I'll explain to you about the CID in this country. Honestly, you would not believe what lengths they go to do undercover work in this country. Just come in and said to these, why is your shop open? They just fucking shit themselves. I went, I'm only joking with. It was my uncle's pal's shop, but obviously his two sons were running it, so he says go in and give them a fright. For those of you who missed my story yesterday and are asking about the lockdown today, basically the month of fasting, the month of Ramadan for Muslims is coming up in 9 days. So what the government have done is they've imposed a 9-day lockdown, well 10 days including today, and that's just to be extra precautious to prevent the spread of any viruses during this holy time of year. Here's a good story, right? It's a true story as well. My uncle's just been telling us it happened in this village. So I'll set the scene for you, right? In Bangladesh, it's not uncommon for people to go and stay in other villages. A lot of people will go and stay with family, friends, relatives. Most people will go in search of work because there's such low employment rates. So it's not uncommon to see new people coming into the village because they'll work in the farms and markets and stuff like that. However, when there's something like a murder case, naturally the people will expect whoever done it to flee the village. They'll expect them to take off, go and hide out in the jungle or in another village across the country. Now about 50... So about 15 years ago, right, there was 4 or 5 murder cases in this village in the space of a year. So when no one had actually fled the village or disappeared, people started suspecting, well, the murderer or murderers must still be living amongst us. They must be in blatant sight. They must still be living in one of these houses around here. However, the police had their suspicions that it was actually the chairman at the time, 15 years ago. Apparently this guy had a really bad reputation. He was known for loads of violence. He was a dodgy guy. He was very corrupt. However, the police had no way of proving that it was the chairman. So if the police can't unearth what's going on, it then gets passed on to the CID. In the CID, they'll do the undercover work and they'll go out and they'll take as long as it needs to work out what's going on. Now in Bangladesh, the methods are very, very different to UK. In UK, sometimes you can identify CID cars. You can recognise by the registration plate. They've got that little hockey puck thing on the back. You can just sometimes, some people say, you can tell by looking in the eyes. They just look like you're busy, blah, blah, blah. There's many ways of knowing in the UK. In Bangladesh, however, things are very different. 30, 40 years ago, the CID, the detectives then, would have sort of, I don't know if it was a uniform or some sort of badge to confirm that they were CID, because the people 30, 40 years ago, yeah, they weren't such liars. They had almost, not respect, but they were kind of afraid of the authorities and they abided by the law a lot more. There was people who were very straight up back in those days. Getting back to these 4 or 5 murder cases, the police passed it on to higher detectives or a higher department. And eventually, the CIDs who it got passed on to got to the bottom of it. And it turned out, and they were right in suspecting that it was the chairman, this guy who had this bad reputation for violence and corruption. It turned out it was him. And this is how they found out. Before they unfolded the truth and actually proved and worked out that it was the chairman, at this point, people were still living in fear. They were very doubtful. They were thinking to themselves, well, if they haven't fled the village, if no one's went missing out the village, surely they must still be living amongst us. And they would look at the next man thinking, is it him? They would look at the next guy thinking, is it him? However, a small amount of the villagers, not many, had small doubts, these tiny suspicions, that if it wasn't someone who's fled the village, because that wasn't the case, what's not to suggest that it was one of the new guys who have came to town, one of these guys who have come for work. So they started looking into this, and at the time, they looked at the people who had arrived in town around the time of the murders, and there was some people working in the markets, there was some people who were working as labourers, some people were working in the rice fields, some people were working on farms. Little did they realise that the CID had sent someone in deep, deep undercover. Picture this, right? There's a guy wearing battered clothes, sweating away out in the sun all day. He's working on a duck farm. His fucking feet and knees are up the mud, tending to these ducks all the time. He's got ripped, battered, dirty clothes. Who would think that that was a fucking CID? That was the CID. There was this guy who was working on a duck farm, right? What he would do is every night before sundown, he would put his ducks away in the duck farm and the duck house thing, and he would take a stroll up in the market, and he would sit very quietly. He would speak to one or two or three people, maybe it's the people who he buys food and cigs or whatever off, and he would just be very quiet, and he would sit here and he would just sip on a cup of tea, and he would sit there and like have the odd word with the odd person. And this went on for 6 months. Over the course of the 6 months, he literally managed to get to the bottom of these 4 or 5 murder cases. He started off small and quiet and just very, very untalkative. And progressively, he kept talking to people, until one day, the word came out, he managed to get information out of someone without making it obvious in the slightest way. This guy was so fucking subtle. He blended in, he made himself look like a fucking poor guy working as an apprentice on this farm. He had no money, he had no connections with anything. He was very humble, quiet guy, he made out. In reality, he was a fucking high up detective. He was a very high up police CID detective. And eventually he got the truth out of everyone. It's by gathering this information progressively over a course of 6 months is what ultimately led him to working out it was the chairman, before he got some real information, some solid evidence that it was the chairman. And he started so low, he would talk to the poorest of people who were nobodies, and that led to another thing, and eventually that led to the truth. He spoke to people, and over 6 months he got the truth out of them. And when he did find out the truth, he reported it immediately to his boss, and his boss made a massive response. He sent 100 army military men into the village to raid on the night time. Now, on the night of this raid, when the military were on the way to capture this chairman, when they reached the outskirts of the village, some of the villagers could hear there was a lot of people coming in the dead of the night. So naturally they assumed it was armed robbers, because that's very common. They started shouting, all the villagers, sending messages, signalling to each other, the Dachites are here, the Dachites are here. Dachite is basically an armed robber, bad guys. They'll come and ransack your house in the middle of the night and do all sorts of other things you didn't want to talk about right now. So when people started panicking, thinking all the fucking armed robbers came, they heard a voice over a megaphone. It's the military, we are the army. Stay where you are, we're coming to raid the fucking place, blah, blah, blah. This actually gave a lot of the villagers peace of mind, because they're genuine, hard-working, down-to-earth, humble, decent people. And they're law-abiding people, and they know they've done nothing wrong, so they've got no reason to fear these men, these military who have turned up in the dead of the night. The military proceeded to raid the chairman's house. They captured him, and then they did something that you would never see in the UK. They dragged him out in front of all the villagers. Now, you've got to think, these villagers, in the middle of the night, 100 military have just came, like 100 army soldiers have came in the dead of the night to capture someone in your village. Now, naturally, people were going to poke their heads out, they were going to have a look, they were going to walk up the street when the military had passed to see where they were going and see what was going on. And eventually everyone twigged on, it's the chairman that's getting raided. We got around very quick in the middle of the night. Now, it's not that people didn't suspect the whole time it was the chairman. It was more so the fact that they were fucking petrified of him. They were really scared of this violent guy who was known for getting people chinned and fucking people done in, apparently also getting people murdered now. So the army, what they did is they dragged him out in front of everyone, and excuse the language, they kicked the fuck out of him. They literally beat him so bad in front of all these villagers. This case then got passed on to the judicial system, where it went to court and got put to trial. And believe it or not, this guy was allowed to live in his own house the whole time the trial was going on. He wasn't kept in jail or on remand or anything like that. He was allowed to live from his own home, and he was expected to attend court on his court dates. However, after 3 years from when the army got a hold of him, passed away, and a lot of people will claim that it was the hiding that he got off the army. It was so bad, it fucking ruined his body or kind of damaged his health or some of his organs or something, which ultimately led to his death eventually. So who would have thought that all this was the result of one man working knee-deep in the mud, wearing ripped clothes on a duck farm? That is the extent of what the CID will go to in this country to unfold the truth. So I hope you've got a better understanding now of why these guys at the shops earlier started shouting, shut the shop, shut the shop. Because me and my uncle rocked up on a motorbike wearing some decent black clothes, they naturally assumed we were undercovers or some form of government officials, and that's why they were shouting, close the shop, close the shop. People in Bangladesh take CID very fucking seriously.